Okay. Hi, I'm Akia, as you all know. Then for the last video, we had a group of people together with some wine and some pie, and we had a discussion about some issues regarding the LGBTQIA plus community and how they feel that we could address these problems and kind of counteract with these issues and whatnot. And today, we're gonna have two people, if they wanna introduce themselves. They have
Izzy!
Get her in the camera.
Hi, Izzy.
Here, let me take that from you for a minute.
I'm Abby.
And I'm gonna ask them a few questions, and we're gonna have them like discuss them and kind of like, you know, have a little fun with it, I guess. Okay, ladies. So let me make sure you get those in the question. I like that. You guys are copying me. Okay, so. First question.
There's a lot to unpack here.
Do you think in today's age, in the LGBTQIA plus community puts people at a disadvantage?
Puts people at a disadvantage. That's a pretty broad term.
Yeah, I think it depends on the sort of the crowd, you know? I think with some people it can be not like I don't want to say a disadvantage, but probably the older generations or certain demographics might be less accepting, and that might take away some opportunities for them. But with other demographics, they can be very welcoming, and for the sake of diversity, I think it can be really important to have that sort of representation, and that can be really good for people in the LGBTQIA plus community.
I also feel like being a part of the community in general, that opens up a broader community to be a part of compared to people who are not a part of the LGBTQIA plus community. I hate to say it, but I feel like being an ally is different from actually being part of the LGBTQIA plus community. And in general, when you are part of the community, it opens up a broader, group of people to be a part of and to interact with that I feel like other non-LGBTQIA people don't have access to. So in that sense, it can actually be advantageous because you open up a broader group of people to be a part of.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, for sure. Cool.
Okay, I like the discussion. Question 2. In an increasingly accepting culture, what are some of the new challenges LGBTQIA plus community members face as opposed to 10, 20, years ago? My bad. Yeah. Should I redo the question again? Because that was pretty bad. But
I think I get it.
You got it?
Want to read it again? It's up to you.
Okay, yeah. In an increasingly accepting culture, what are some of the new challenges the LGBTQIA plus community members face as opposed to 10, 20, 50 years ago? Like, past. You don't have to go that far back. But
I think a lot of ground has been made in that amount of time. The amount of acceptance has greatly increased, which is really awesome. And the issues, I think, are less like, marriage is legal, which is awesome. And so it's less big issues, but it's more of issues within the community of like some parts of the LGBTQIA plus community still feel alienated within the community, or not understanding all the different identities that have come into light the past 20 or so years, that just it's hard for other people to understand those and make those feel valid. And I also think the pressure of like coming out, I think, is different now. That it before used to be a really big deal to come out, and it was a really bold thing to do, where now, because the world is so accepting, it sort of takes the pressure off of that, which is a good and a bad thing, because it's still something really important, and it shouldn't be something that should be taken lightly, which I think now people can feel like it's not even that big a deal, but it still is a big deal, and it's still something really important. So I don't know, but those are more smaller issues compared to like protesting in the street for certain human rights.
Mm-hmm. I feel like some of the issues have moved away from the broader LGBTQIA plus issues to just individual community issues. For example, the trans community.
Yeah.
I feel like especially today, trans community issues are being highlighted more, especially with like issues of getting your gender identity changed on like a driver's license or things like that, or bathroom bills or things like that. And people feeling invalidated because others aren't respecting the personal pronouns that they want to use or things like that. I feel like instead of it just being an issue of, well, I think in the past it was mainly just focused on gays and lesbians, and it wasn't a broader community.
The bisexual erasure.
Right, exactly. Right. So I feel like today our community has become more inclusive and it's gotten more names to it, and the newer aspects of the community are what we're fighting for today. I granted, I still feel like we're fighting for like issues for gays and lesbians, but I also feel like today the spotlight is now starting to turn onto the trans community or a lot of these newer identities that are coming to the plus. Yes, the plus. Yeah, for sure.
Do you guys think if there's any ways to address these things that you talked about, like bringing more inclusiveness into, or like helping like shift more to help the individuals in that community, like the trans specifically, more that other people in that community can do to help those people in that? Or any other issues that you talked about when you were talking, because you each hit on some very key things, a lot of which, is there anything that you guys think could help like push that progress along even further?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is like education, just making people aware of like the identities. I know when I mentioned to a friend how I felt like I was probably pansexual, that was something that I was starting to discover, her immediate response was like, I've never heard of that. What is that? And had a lot of questions and things like that, which I was really glad that she was willing to learn and she was curious. But a lot of people, even within the community, might not know these smaller identities are lesser known or feel like they're less valid because they don't get the big attention, things like that. Just education, not only with people not in the community, but also within the community, pushing that message of inclusiveness is, I think, important.
And the other thing I think is important is to just respect people's pronouns. Even if you're unsure about people's pronouns, you should just ask.
Yeah.
I know it's kind of an awkward conversation to have, to say, hey, it would be just, I think it's easier to just, ask about people's pronouns and, respect the personal pronouns that they use. So I feel like just that niche issue could be addressed, especially with the trans slide.
Let's go.
The trans community. We can address that issue by just respecting people's pronouns more. For sure. Yeah.
Okay. How do you think society's preconceived notions and ideas on gender performance dictate how we make assumptions about people in and out of the LGBTQIA plus community? And are these assumptions always correct, and how often are they correct?
So like how we use society's gender stereotypes to sort of make
yeah,
a
like they're
judgment
not
on
just
what someone's okay,
and
interesting.
how it affects both non-LGBTQIA plus and the
That's a
LGBTQIA
really
plus.
good question. I have a lot of beef with gender stereotypes. Mostly because I just feel like boxing someone into that is so confining, like saying only girls can paint their nails, or like only boys can play football or play rugby. Like it's just not fair. It's just not fair to other people that want to do those things. And so it can be toxic, I think, to people in the community who aren't out and feel pressured to act a certain way because they feel like they need to uphold sort of an image that they don't feel like, and if they don't do that, then that might let on that they're not. But I also think it can be toxic to people who aren't in the community but are just different from what society expects them to be, and it can be really harmful to them to have people make these assumptions about them and about who they are as a person when they're not true. They're just founded in stereotype.
I mean, I completely agree with everything that you just said. Two things that kind of come to mind is a toxic masculinity, where men are usually forced to be so hyper macho masculine that it could be to their detriment, and I mean, it could force them to behave the way that they don't want to behave. I mean, things like that. And also, I guess hyper-femininity is also problematic as well, because the generic stereotype female roles could be confined as well, and just things like that, kind of emphasizing what you said. Gosh, I was going to bring up a point, and I completely forgot what the point I was going to make. Hackaroonie. But yeah, in general, I feel like gender stereotypes are very confining. Oh, I remember what I was going to bring up. Okay. I mean, based on your mannerisms, I know that people associate, for example, more feminine men as being gay and things like that, even though that more feminine men don't necessarily have to be gay. So so associating those two is problematic, not only because it kind of, I guess, demonizes those people and makes them seem less manly because they behave in a certain way, and also not all more feminine men are gay.
Mm-hmm.
And so being labeled gay when you're not gay is also problematic in and of itself, and the reverse can happen too. I guess more masculine women aren't necessarily lesbians or gay,
Right.
but it's still harmful to be called that because that's not what you identify as. So associating those two is really problematic because not everyone falls into boxes, even people who don't behave in a certain gender stereotype, things like that.
Yeah, and even people that are in the community, like, might feel pressured to act more. Like if there's a gay man who feels like, oh, I don't like my nails, I don't go to drag shows and things like that. It's like, he might feel like less of the community because he doesn't do the stereotypically gay things, which is just not fair because you shouldn't put a marker on like how LGBTQIA plus you are to make you valid, you know?
Oh, I completely agree with that.
Yeah.
Okay, so this may be the last one, maybe not. Okay. Oh, you dropped something. Okay. Why do you think the LGBTQIA plus community members are at a higher risk of mental health issues than their cis straight peers?
I think a lot of it has to do with dysphoria. I guess in multiple different contexts. I guess for more for people of the trans community and things like that, gender dysphoria, not really having a set identity and things like that, and being happy with yourself can create a lot of stress and lead to mental illness. Even if you're just struggling to find an identity with your sexuality, and not to say that you need an identity or things like that,
Right.
it could still be difficult not knowing and being sort of in the middle ground, and not being completely content with who you are and what your identity is or your lack of an identity is. And I think that creates a lot of mental turmoil, things like that.
Yeah, I think a lot of it too has to do with how society views the community, and like they're getting better, but a lot of it, like representation is a big issue growing up and feeling that you're different, but not seeing anyone like you in media or the TV shows that you watch or things like that. It can be very isolating to be like, I'm the only one like me, or I'm the only one who thinks these things, and not realizing until you're much older. But even then, the damage is already done because those are so internalized. So I think a lot of it, and society's getting better. There's acceptance is better than it ever was before, arguably, but there's still a lot of issues of violence and of families that are not accepting and things like that. And there's a lot of fear in that because everybody wants to be accepted for who they are. And so it's a really scary thing to know that there's people out there who, on principle, aren't going to accept you.
For sure. Yeah, I completely agree with that. So it's both external and internal. Basically, we're screwed up.
That's okay. Okay, so do you guys have anything else that you want to add to the discussion? Anything that we missed, that we didn't hit on with the questions, or that you think is useful for this video for people to know and to have in the thing?
I do think, just in general though, I think it's important to note that it has gotten a lot better and it's continuing to progress because there is a lot of discussion, and I guess with the media too, things have been pointed out and they're continuing to circulate and create discussion about the LGBTQIA plus community, and there is a lot more representation in media. I've seen every Netflix show that I watch has at least one gay character, and a lot of them have trans characters too, which is really, really cool.
Yeah.
So there's a lot more representation and it's getting a lot better.
I think too, with all of the new identities that are becoming more normalized, there's a lot more that people can identify as, but I also think it's important to recognize that you don't have to fit into a box. That's what the Q is for, or that's what the plus is for. You don't need to box yourself in and say, this is what I am, and think really hard about it. It's okay to just be you and cross that bridge when you get to it.
And we actually have one more question. Scott here has a question for you. Right quick.
Scott.
Yeah. You were late.
Sure, I'm sorry. So it kind of goes along with the general how more acceptance is happening in society nowadays in regards to LGBTQ community, IA, sorry. And, but they still are just in many categories systematically disadvantaged in that they face discrimination by like government forces in every level in regards to like discrimination employment. In 20 states still have only passed non-discrimination laws. And I mean, also another thing I found though that kind of relates to that in the sense of it just regards to general societal acceptance is that 40% of homeless children in the US identified as LGBTQ associated. So I wanted to just ask what you might think of that, if there's any connections to that in general.
Yeah, I mean, we can talk a lot about how progress has been made, but there's still a long way to go. Speaking on like government level, there was something I think just recently happened in Michigan where it was like the Elliott Larson Act. Either they just passed a bill to amend it or they are going to start amending it, but for a long time it didn't include rights for LGBTQIA+ community members. It was like the Civil Rights Act in Michigan, but it didn't include them, so people could be fired, people could be discriminated against for even getting a job or turned away in restaurants, things like that, just for being part of the community. And we're just now getting around to that, and it's 2018. And I know there are still other states where it's not been fixed in their legislation. And so there's a lot systematically that needs to be undone. But I think now we're at the point where we can have those conversations and have those discussions, and it's not like a drop in the ocean, you know?
Yeah, I completely agree. There's a lot of work to still be done, especially not only just with government acceptance, but also at the individual level and even at the individual family level. Because if I had to guess, those 40% of homeless children were kicked out by their family members. So it not only has to do with the larger government level, but it has to do with smaller community levels and also at the family level and things like that. So there's a lot to be done and a lot to address, and it's definitely not going to happen overnight, and it's definitely got to start somewhere, especially with legislature and things like that. But also in order to get that legislature to change, people have to speak up and also make sure that those laws get passed in each of the individual states.
Vote.
Yes, yes. So, people have to keep the discussion going and make sure that the senators do what they're supposed to do.
Yeah, and I do think it is promising that after the most recent election, there's like a record number of LGBTQIA+ community members in our national government, which I think is like super promising. It means we're going to start having those discussions and getting things done on a much greater scale. It's really exciting.
Yep. Well, thank you guys. This is Akia signing out. Like, subscribe, and comment to continue the discussion, and to keep going. And any suggestions for if we decide to do any future videos or whatnot. Thank you. Pause.